danced ecstatically, but I don't think I've done what is called ecstatic dance. The container is now open. My beard is like not even right now. Learning the history of your path is one of the most important parts of the practice because it gives you that added perspective on the labors that had to go into birthing this world that you're a part of and that you're participating in and gaining from and contributing to. When we know our history, we enrich our practice. For that reason, today is a big day for the container because we welcome on none other than Jason Diggs to the podcast. He saw firsthand some of the biggest moments in the history of circling and authentic relating, and he was there working alongside luminaries like Ken Wilbur and Sarah Ness and all of these other big names in the movement. He helped to develop and popularize the practices that we all hold dear in the relational arts. So in this episode, we talk to him as he walks us through a history, kind of a first-hand account of circling and authentic relating. Are you interested to learn more about Jason Diggs and his work? Check out his Substack, Jason Diggs, that's digges.substack.com, link in show notes. There you can find a bunch of recorded dialogues. He has like 30 podcast episodes he recorded several years ago. He has his latest writings, his project Tech Less, Create More, and just a lot of great authentic relating content. You can also read his book, Conflict Equals Energy, which is maybe the best intro to the ideas at the heart of authentic relating. I know that it's Sai's favorite book in the genre, and so that's very high praise. You can also find an audiobook version of it read by the author himself. To learn more about the relational arts, you know exactly what to do. Go to thecontainerpod.com. Check out our knowledge base. You'll find links to all of our social media and links to our Patreon, where you can become a patron and support us with small monthly contributions, which we love so much. Our discussion begins with a brief history of ecstatic dance, which got its start on the very same commune that Jason Diggs is talking to us from. And now, we are pleased to bring you the first half of our interview with Jason Diggs.
There's an origin story. So it started here, in this very place, 5 minutes away from here 20 years ago, and went all over the world. And they started with the premise that it's a sober event, you dance barefoot, there's no talking on the dance floor, and the DJs are really kind of giving people this longer on-ramp and longer off-ramp, so similar to the 5 Rhythms dance cycle, if you're familiar with that. And with like much better music and DJs doing that. So that's how it started.
What I'm really appreciating right now is that the three of us today are going to chart the history of a practice, and then in microcosm, that is what just happened, is that we brought up a practice and then you provided the historical context that we need to understand it. I'm really enjoying that right now.
I noticed that too.
I know. I love that you guys love it because I do this all the time, and some people are just like indifferent to this. Like, I just feel like an anthropologist.
That's awesome.
Specifically for transformational modalities. And I also have like the scientist critical thing. Like, there's certain modalities I'm like, oh, that one sucks because of the origins of it, and then like how fraught with, scandal it is, or like, I don't have a good opinion of Tantra, just partly because, a good 60% of the Tantra teachers, re-traumatize people.
Right.
And so it makes a bad name for the good ones,
Yeah, I really, I think it's so important to capture voices that are well informed by experience and also have this critical lens. Like, I think especially with things like circling and authentic relating, there's so much like uh good friendly feeling that comes up just like day one. You come into these rooms and you're like, it's panting and breathy, and like you're blown away by how warm and fuzzy it is. And that's wonderful, but then I think it like leads to a kind of like all embracing less critical lens, or at least it can. I feel like there's so much value to be gained from long like third tier experience on this path, and that's like a big reason why we're so excited to talk to you, because you have that in a field where so many people do. It's so new to most people in it, including myself.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it, because any response I have to that would be like good podcast material.
Well, Jason Diggs, writer of Conflict Equals Energy, Sai's favorite book in the entire genre of circling books, available everywhere you find books, including Audible, that's where I first heard it. And not only that, but has basically, you've had your fingerprints on so many wonderful things for decades, all the way from, if I remember correctly, Ken Wilbur up to now in an intentional community built around these principles. So welcome to the container. That's so exciting.
Thank you. Thanks for creating the space in which we can play and explore together. And I think one of the cool things about the authentic relating and circling movement is like, there's a lot of facilitation geeks. There's a lot of people who are really interested in how do we create a container, and what type of container is it? And like, it's like, you need a really robust container to do alchemy, to do like deep transformational work. This is where the word crucible comes from. It's actually like an iron bowl that's like 5 inches thick, because you can do really deep transformative work in a crucible.
Wow.
Now that's a container. Yeah, so we talked shortly like last week, and got excited around the idea of you walking us through the history of this movement. Something that is unfortunately under-documented for what an amazing force it is in the lives of people who like get involved. So I think that as much as we can pick your brain for not just the information you have, but the like lived experience you have of engaging with these principles and living them for, not just 6 months, not just 1 year, not just 5, 10 years, but, really you've made your path out of it. And that is something that I would really like to hear braided alongside that history.
Yeah, I'm all ready for that. That sounds super fun. Where do you want to start?
Take us to the very beginning.
Yeah,
I imagine there's mist and there's maybe a hill, a shining hill or something. I don't know. You tell me. Where does it start?
Summer of 2003, I moved to Boulder, and this was a real leap of faith for me. Like, I had actually never been to the state of Colorado. But I met someone on the internet. Back then we were using like AOL Instant Messenger and like forums. Ken Wilbur had this site called Integral Naked. And, I had listened to a dialogue with Ken Wilbur and like David Data and like, these early dialogues that Ken was publishing, which was just phone calls that he was recording. And he called it Integral Naked. And so on the Integral Naked forums, there was a group of friends that was forming, and this random person had gone out to Boulder and visited. And so he and I teamed up and moved out to Boulder together. We were both from different parts of upstate New York. And that really set me on my path. That was over 20 years ago. And personal growth and transpersonal psychology and integral theory have been my path ever since. And about halfway through that journey, I encountered authentic relating and circling because Robert McNaughton brought it back from California, brought it back from the Bay Area to Boulder, and Boulder kind of became the mecca for this work about 12 years ago. But I was Ken Wilbur's videographer. I used to pin microphones on him and, pin microphones on David Data and Deepak Chopra and like all these famous people. And I was just like documenting and recording and like, I was a very introverted person for that period of my life. And yeah, so that was the origins. Most of the leaders of the circling and authentic relating movement were all deeply influenced by Ken Wilber's work, because I think it's this grand vision of like, hey, we have all of this wisdom from Western psychology, which, is research-based and all the developmental psychologists, and we have all of this wisdom from the East. And we've been in this mixing pot since the mid-60s. And so he wanted to make sense of it all. And he wanted to create a map of development that involved places beyond the ego, parts of us that are really transparent to the divine. And he kind of made this theory that it wasn't like, oh, we have an ego, then we're enlightened suddenly, which is kind of the way Eckhart Tolle tells it in Power of. He wanted to put, so he created so much terminology, and most really advanced therapists and psychologists out there that you find in Boulder and Berkeley and everywhere else have all been influenced by Ken Wilber, because he created the entire map and terminology. And so the circling and authentic relating movement, we're really working in the intersubjective realm. And right now I'm conveying a bunch of information, right? But there's a relational space between the three of us, and we could like go there and be in the practice, and there's medicine there. So what happens when we drink that medicine? What happens if we marinate in that together? Which brings us a little bit out of the problem solving, mind and more into the heart is one way to say it. But
yeah, I noticed just even as you move to refer to that, I went from this very fast, airy, heady space into like thicker, warmer, moving down as I'm starting to be like, oh yeah, let's check in there to our connection. So even just saying it is so you start to like get down into that totally different, it's like a different mouthfeel.
I like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Ken Wilber is like creating, he's almost like mapping out the connections between Eastern and Western thought that had been going on already for a generation, but no one had really systematized it, or even, were there any big even swings at it yet? I don't know, but he made a really big swing. I know that.
Yeah, he published his first book at 22 and then, had 25 books, that really, and unfortunately, or, it's just the way our society is going. No one reads 800-page books anymore. So that's actually good for me, because I think of myself as like a popularizer or an essentializer. I don't even use the word integral theory in my book, but it's baked in there. Like for people who studied it, like, the chapter 1, polarity, is about how do we take multiple perspectives and how do we become larger than the either or consciousness, and how do we step into the both and consciousness, because this is the fuel for development, really.
I find myself, I keep going back to this term you use that I'm not familiar with, or that I've heard, and now I'm like, my curiosity, intersubjectivity. What is intersubjectivity?
It's the same as the relational, what we refer to as the relational space.
Okay.
You know, you all use the phrase relational arts, which I love. Yeah.
We love it too.
We love it.
The healing arts, the relational arts.
Yeah.
RA.
So yeah, so I'm interested in this, like, there's this soil that's laid down where really, like, intellectuals in academia are introducing more and more Eastern thinking in the West, and then that leads to people like Ken Wilbur, and then out of, I guess he creates everything with Ken Wilbur's integral, right? So he has his, like, integral, is it Institute in Boulder? What's the name of it?
Yeah, Integral Institute was the think tank. You know, we did workshops, and myself and Robert McNaughton both worked for Ken.
Yeah.
And that's why when Robert started his project, it was called the Integral Center. And it was a physical location. It was 10,000 square feet in downtown Boulder. It was open for about 7 years, and it was, like, really due to grace. You know, we had a patron who had bought the building and remodeled it and was giving it to us, you know, at a fraction of the cost, and so that we could run a community center. And so, but Robert, because he had personally been so transformed by this work, he didn't want to teach integral theory, because Ken had already done that. Like, the world that he and I were in for almost 10 years was a lot of heady stuff. It was a lot of models with a lot of maps. It draws people who are psychologists. It draws people who are theorists. It draws people who are, like, very brainy. But we wanted to make an application that could reach anyone. And that's really what birthed the authentic relating and circling movement, is that this building was dedicated to spreading the relational arts. And people came from all over. We had one course. So our main course was called T3, Train the Trainer. We had one course where 6 people moved from Australia to Boulder for 6 months. So that, because it was one weekend for 6 months. And, you know, a handful of people would, you know, come from Europe for this course. And that's
what was the course like?
A good question. So Alethea was the course that started it all, and that was just the 3-day. That was, like, the introductory course. And Alethea was about 5% conceptual teachings, tools, and about 95% experiential. So we would do organic circling the first day. You know, every single person would get a full birthday circle. So we would have 24 people come in, and every single person would get a birthday circle throughout the weekend, because we had 6 course leaders and 6 assistant course leaders. And so I could talk and name a lot of my teachers. I was turned on by this work. I spent 1.5 years apprenticing as an assistant course leader, which was a glorified volunteer. But the magic that made it all happen was we had 12 people who were really steeped in this consciousness, this mode of being, for 24 participants.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah. And so 9.
Yeah. So it's like, I
Oh.
guess it's like, I'm getting very excited just imagining going to this for 3 days where you have 12 people guiding 24. First of all, that's just a lot of heads in a room. And so for 3 days, I guess everyone who's coming there, have they heard of circling, or a lot of these people have never circled before? And then they're
No.
all doing birthday circles. That was kind of what circling was at that time.
Yeah, we had a version called organic circling. But we can get into the difference between integral circling and Guy Sengstock's approach, and then the circling Europe approach. We can talk about that if it's interesting in this podcast.
Extremely
It's
interesting.
extremely interesting, especially like, where they come from, and then what was practiced here at the center.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, where we are in the story right now.
Yeah. And just to answer your question from before, T3 was just a 6-month version of Aletheia.
Gotcha.
So we would teach people to circle.
Just like all day, every day. That sounds beautiful. For 6 months.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. It was 1 weekend a month for 6 months. So it was like 27 days total over 6 months. And,
man.
Yeah. Integral circling was based on curiosity and getting someone's world. So it was really designed to illuminate people's relational blind spots. So as facilitators, we would be like, okay, what's happening between you two? Like there was this micro expression from Sarah when you spoke, Jonathan, like, what is that? And we would get like really finely detailed, and it was very heavily facilitated. Like you would stay on one thread, and if other participants were opening other threads, you'd be like, oh, cool. Like you would either weave it in, or you'd pause that thread so you could stay on. And so it was all based on no fixing, changing, or advising. It was all based on welcome everything. That was the methodology.
It's called integral circling, and I'm curious if Ken Wilbur had his actual hands on it, or if it just came up in that milieu. So okay.
No, Ken was just the godfather of all of it.
Gotcha.
So as far as I know, at least 90% of the known circling and authentically relating leaders studied his work in depth before they started teaching.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And the godmother was Susan Campbell. So Susan Campbell. Yeah.
Susie.
She wrote this book called Getting Real, which was the first book that they would assign in T3 that we read. And, she made this really cool distinction of like, are you communicating to control, or are you communicating to connect, which is right. So, yeah. So, and years later, I got to interview her on my podcast, and she came to one of our conferences, the Relational Leadership Conference. But she didn't teach us directly. It was more like they were the conceptual parents of this, because Ken was so heady and into human development, and Susan was so practical and like, yeah. And I just feel so like this is so fun for me. I can just go in so many directions. I want to hear which direction you want me to go in.
Well, I just feel so excited. I guess that it was recently, sometime in the last year, that Jonathan calls me up and he's like, oh, I just found this book. It's called Getting Real by this woman, Susan Campbell. And he's like, it seems like all this stuff is like really heavily related to authentic, like that he discovered it. And then now there's this confirmation that that was, something that fed into it. Is just, it's confirming and exciting that, on our own separate path, like that was that you found that route, and that there is a clear line, like there's a clear line from her to this.
Yeah.
And I'm noticing too I was surprised when I found Getting Real that it's like early aughties, right? That it was released, something like that. Um, and then I mean, she's like practicing long before that. It's not like she just like started thinking about it in the aughties, but it's like it alerted me to, wow, there's been a lot of thinking is like converging here in this space.
Yeah.
And I really like the way you phrase it, kind of like her as this practical tools based, like it's like tactical in a way.
Mhm.
And then Wilbur provides more, um it's kind of this like, yeah, headier theoretical, like stitching everything together, the putty
Yeah.
to like keep everything, shape everything. um because in a lot of ways what I have found so strange about circling is that I can have intellectual discussions about the practice and what just happened in the practice from now till the end of time.
Mhm.
But then it also has given me this just felt intuitive sense of how to connect with myself while connecting with others. And like, and yeah, so it's very strange that it develops you in these two, you know, contradictory directions.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you're practicing this integral circling, and then there's also, you mentioned Guy Sengstock in Circling Europe. I'm wondering, was Sengstock doing his thing yet?
Um, yeah, he actually was teaching before the Integral Center ever started. You know, that's why he's credited as the founder of circling, or the person that coined the term. And then he took a break from teaching, and then Decker kind of brought circling to Boulder, and through the shaping of Robert McNaughton and Michael Portelli, and Josh Levin, who are all my teachers, like the magic that Decker was doing, like he would put his attention on someone, and he would like, it was like he could see the Matrix, like that moment in the Matrix where Neo sees the code. And then he could simultaneously deeply accept you exactly where you are, and ask you questions and give you reflections to that in a way that really helped people blossom in development.
Wow.
So the early leaders that I just mentioned, they were just watching Decker and they're like, how the heck do we teach this? How do we systematize it? How do we put it into a model? And so, Michael Porcelli created the first model of authentic relating in a lot of ways. And like my book is extremely heavily influenced by him, because he's the one who systematized the curriculum of T3 and took the first stab at it, which was, 4 or 5, it was maybe 5 years before I wrote my book. So, yeah.
Okay, so let me get this. So when does Sengstock begin his work?
Oh, way before, way
Like,
before the Boulder School. It was happening in Berkeley, and it was like Decker and Kendra Kunov and Guy Sengstock and Shana James and like 10 other people developed this work in Berkeley before we ever encountered it. Yeah.
Okay, so like in the 80s or early 90s, it's starting?
No, this was in the 2000s.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, gotcha. And they're circling, from what I understand, and the materials of Guy Sengstock I've seen, it's very like there is a facilitator and they are leading this discussion into a single person. And then, if I understand correctly, people, it's kind of like you were describing with integral circling, people can bring up new stuff and then the facilitator folds it in or folds it out.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to think of how that can be led by these like charismatic geniuses who just like have this way of doing that.
Or have a lot of practice doing it.
Yeah.
And then the systematizing, you're saying Michael Porcelli. You said that I want to go back to Michael Porcelli because I got really interested because I'm actually trying to fill in a timeline from my own life, which was that I went to a 7-day conference in 2003 in San Francisco. Maybe it was 2004. And I swear that it was definitely authentic relating, but I don't know if that's what it was called. Like I remember, and I only remember bits and pieces, and then so I'm trying to like fit in the timeline. And I remember taking away all these like there was a whole seminar on win-win, like in a relationship, and this friend of mine had invited me. Yeah, it's like so fuzzy. That was when I was still drinking.
Yeah.
And so the timeline, and I want to go back to Michael Porcelli.
Yeah. There was a whole crew in Berkeley. They were called Soul to Soul, and that was just the loose name of their community. And they created the Authentic Man program and the Authentic Woman experience. And Authentic Man program, because it was really financially successful to bring in guys, and they would do men's work for 3 days. And then on the 4th day, they would bring in all of these women who were like dressed up and looking great. And they would have the men approach the women, and then they would circle them around what came up, and the women would give them feedback, right? So one of the things that is the most growth producing about AR and circling is you get a lot of feedback.
Yes.
Most of the time, we go through our lives and like, there's this, it's really rude to give someone feedback. and we walk away and we're like, man, we talk to our friend, like, man, that person just rubs me the wrong way. And we never tell them directly to their face. And right, this is the default culture that we live in. It's unsafe to give someone feedback in the workplace, because it just creates problems and reduces productivity, blah, blah, blah. And this triangulation thing is just the norm. Well, in authentic relating, we hopefully ask consent, but in a circle, it's like I'm facilitating a person's openness, because the more open system they can be, the more receptive they can be for of feedback from the other participants, right? And it's the feedback that is the fuel for the growth. That's what the chapter on hologram is in my book, chapter 9. Is about when we see ourselves from the perspective of one other person and the perspective of community, we grow like crazy.
I just re-listened to that the other day after we spoke, that chapter, because it's such a fascinating topic to me. The way that projection works, the way that that the hologram works, and we curated a little games night the other night, kind of based around those topics as well.
So we're weaving history, we're weaving theory. How's this going for the two of you?
I want to own that I'm like I'm going in and out of like feelings of levitation. I just want to own that. It's really, really wonderful to get to talk to someone who is here for a lot of that stuff.
For me, I'm noticing this moment that I'm really caught up in the hologram thing in my mind. And I am that has me like a little bit distracted.
I can tell you that a lot of the things that I'm teaching came directly from this community that I'm talking about. and I'm talking about them in a new way.
Mm.
So when my teachers would talk about hologram, they would say how you do one thing is how you do everything, which I think is really interesting shortcut way to understand it, but it's not exactly true. And it's like, and they would actually talk about like a physical hologram, what it is. It's like this, metal mirror plate that if you break it on the ground, each, piece contains the whole, and all of that is the hologram. It is the teaching on hologram. It is integral theory. Like the whole contains the parts, and it is Gestalt psychology. But I think it's much easier to understand that, like, when I receive feedback from others, that's when I have the chance to own my relational blind spots. And that is really the fuel of the growth that I experienced, is seeing my own hologram when I was in circles. And sometimes it'd be like, oh shit. And other times it'd be like, oh wow. And like, this is what we would actually, so we called it aletheia, which is an aletheia moment, which is, are you interested in the origin story of this?
Yeah.
Extremely.
Yeah. So this is the workshop that started it all. That's kind of the way I said it. We ran aletheia 25 times over the course of 5 years. So we would do it every 3 months.
Wow.
And people came from all over the world to do it. So Lethe means it's this river in Greek mythology where you would forget everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, like literally before you were reincarnated, or you would drink from the river Lethe, you would forget everything. And then throughout life, you would have to remember who you are, and you would have to remember wisdom. And so it was seen as like a very an interesting thing for philosophers, because philosophers were trying to cultivate wisdom and remember the truth of who they were. And so Aletheia means the return from forgetfulness. It means the remembering of the truth. And in Greece, or in Greek, it also is an exclamation, like aletheia, like it's happening. I'm remembering.
That really resonates with me in the sense that when the biggest insights I've ever had in my life did not feel like new information. It felt like, I forgot that. And it feels like remembering the deepest wisdom you get. It's like, oh, fuck, that's right. What? When did I lose track of that?
Yeah, I also had the experience with those big, the aletheia is that it's often something that I've heard and that I've read and that I've thought about in my mind probably a dozen times, but the actual aha is like this physical felt sense. That's what I always call embodiment.
Yeah.
I think I use the term wrong, but I'm like, I know it now in my bones. Like, it's wisdom to me now. It is no longer just this, like thing that I can regurgitate that I learned in a book. It's like, I know it because I've experienced it and it's part of me now, for sure. Or again.
Yeah. Like there's this first phase of learning something where it's a platitude that's like, I guess, obviously true or whatever. And then at some point you're like, oh, I get it now. Yeah. Damn. Aletheia. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I forgot where we were. You're running these Aletheia events and
Yeah. I don't know. Where do you want to pick up? I can talk about the next chapter.
I do kind of want to hang out a little bit more at this center and hang out with these people and go to these events that y'all are hosting. And there is something here. I'm like, in my imagining, it's just so much fun to be walking around in this 10,000 foot space. And, you know, uh, I guess I just would love to learn more, like from Alethea to T3, and then like how are things being presented and trained? Because I'm imagining with just the sheer number of people going through there, that's probably creating a huge amount of the next generation of like circling facilitators who are then spreading that around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like, it seems like a really important like point from which things kind of emerge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of us leaders knew each other. It's like, Amy Silverman brought all of this to New York City. She was the first one teaching in New York City, and she was trained in Boulder, the same place me and Sarah trained. And John and Sean, brought it to Europe, and they trained the same place that we trained. And it was a family. It was a community center. Like the staff knew each other really, really well. We were in each other's lives. We put so much into it. Like we would have, 10 hours of staff meetings and staff hangout time to be able to produce a course that was, 25 hours long over the course of a weekend. In addition to being in the course with the participants. So it was like, there is something to be said for intensives, right? Because it stretches our muscle, it stretches our emotional capacity to pay attention. There was a great emphasis on tracking. And
Similar.
In my normal life, when I'm driving my car, or I'm relaxing, or I'm communicating, or I'm doing logistics with people, I don't need to be fully present. In fact, being fully present all the time is impossible. It's like our consciousness goes through cycles of activation and rest. But we were like elite athletes in paying attention.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
To micro expressions, to tone of voice, to group dynamics. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the intersubjective or the relational field. We were elite athletes. And I think I probably did 20 weekends a year for 5 years straight.
Damn.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about tracking those things, I'm imagining that you're doing some book study on what to look for, or you're having experts. No, it's all just
the practice
from
of
the
doing
miles.
it
Wow.
so often. Yeah.
It's all in oral tradition. All in oral tradition. And that's why this movement is not well documented. You can't.
Yeah.
Because the practice is the practice.
Damn. Yeah, that's interesting that I noticed my first instinct is like, wow, to do that, I would want to be armed with a lot of lists and tables and models. Yeah. And it's just getting those hour after hour after hour, so that you are getting the miles and experiencing it, so that you feel it, I guess. I guess y'all are probably just talking about this a lot too, right?
Yeah, everything was about the debrief. You said this thing earlier, I feel like I could debrief, one circle for twice as long as the circle, or forever even.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was all about debrief. And in fact, one of our steps of circling is debrief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, ours too.
We've started calling it reflection, but
not to
then we
brag.
then we just go back to calling it debriefing. We have 2 episodes early on about that.
Yeah, so y'all are just in debrief a lot of the time, either practice or debrief. A little less than half of the weekends, almost the whole weekend, just doing that. That's a hot house. And then are you like through the week also fitting in circles and doing?
Oh yeah, the community center, had 14 classes a month for the local community on circling and authentic relating. So there was, 2.5 classes every single week where the local community, who are all paying $75 a month to be a part of this community center. And maybe they couldn't even afford the expensive workshops, but like it was really accessible to the local Boulder community.
Wow.
And that's why Boulder is unlike any other community in the entire world. There's free authentic relating in Boulder twice a week available, with no money changing hands for, a decade, because it's just, it was really special. It was a really special time.
It's beautiful.
I feel curious about I'm like really into the pedagogy and the the designing of the container and designing of the course, and I feel curious about like the relational aspect of working with a large group of people who are all facilitators and who are all building these courses together, and what that experience was like at the center. Like, I guess I have this thought is like if lots of people are really dedicated and really in practice and tracking and doing these intensives, then that would lend itself to a collaborative, cooperative experience. And I'm just curious if that's true. Experience of building the courses and doing the work that you do before you're presenting it to the attendees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a lot of input on the curriculum design. There was a lot of discussion between the leaders, and all of the leaders would take feedback from the younger leaders, or the less experienced leaders and assistant course leaders, and then they would make decisions around it. And that's one of the core principles of Integral. It's called natural hierarchy. In other words, we can't deconstruct the fact that some people have more experience than others, and someone needs to make the decision. If everyone is trying to lead all the time, it's called anarchy and chaos. And so there needs to be natural hierarchy for anything to be built. It's just kind of a principle of human society.
I noticed the Jonathan, who spent many years reading anarchist theory, is having like little notes that he wants to add to a lot of The container is now closed. Jason Diggs is a great resource. He provides this important first-hand account of the history of circling and authentic relating, but he also has just facilitated so much and been in practice for so much, and that alone is really worth hearing from. And we're excited to share the second half of our interview with y'all next week. So remember to check out his Substack, jasondiggs.substack.com, link in show notes, and connect to us. Go to our website, thecontainerpod.com. Check out our YouTube if you're not watching this on our YouTube right now. Like and subscribe, review, all of those things. Engage. Feed the algorithm. Not unlike the demon Mammon, we must shovel our likes and attention and follows into the maw of the beast. It is the only way we will be set free. We'll see you next week. Take care of each other.